Now, it's great to be with a group like this. I mean, one, you're a technologically savvy crew. Two, like you mentioned, there's people from, I guess, over 15 different countries. It's a global crew. And I like this relatively intimate setting, 300 of you, but wow, it's got kind of a sense that we're all in here together. And what I want to basically do is talk to you on a big picture level, though. What is going on with technology and what is going on with other trends related to technology that is really working on almost basically a world historical plane. But there's really two fundamental things that drives these periods of kind of rapid innovation that happen for about 10, 20 years. What happens is you get such deep structural changes to the fabric of the economy, the fabric of society, that essentially the old systems for organizing things just don't work. They basically get disrupted in a very fundamental way. So, for example, it's like when you go from an agrarian economy, an economy organized around agriculture, to one organized around industrial production. The other thing that actually drives these changes is essentially unprecedented challenges. It's something appears that your old system has absolutely no way to wrap its head around solving. And so you're forced into kind of really deep and fundamental innovation. Now, this has happened in the case of the United States. So just to kind of put a lens, well, you know, how big a deal is that? It's happened about 4 times in this country. About mid-century, around the Civil War with Abraham Lincoln. Everyone kind of associates him with, you know, slavery and the Civil War. Really, it actually ushered in a crazy amount of innovation around the fundamentals of the American economy. I mean, we did things like the transcontinental railroads. 25 years of essentially reinventing America that lasted for the second half, 50 years of the 19th century. Then right around the turn of the 20th century, there was an explosion of innovation for about 25 years. We call it the Progressive Era. And ultimately, the last one was around the Great Depression of World War II. Again, these things happen. They carry on these very classic patterns. We're in one of those moments now. We are watching the most fundamental technology transformation at the very basis of society that you could possibly get. And basically, it distills down to the computerization of everything and the interconnection of everything. That is partly driving, and also some other trends are driving, essentially the global interconnection of everything. We're just in these early stages of trying to sort that out. And the third thing is we are hitting this level of unprecedented challenges, not the least of which is global climate change. But there's all kinds of things, system breakdowns that are working all over the world. It's essentially a system breakdown, and it's basically driven by this very fundamental upheaval that's happening around us. So whether we like it or not, and I like it, we are living through a really amazing moment of transformation in our country and in the world. So what I'm going to basically do today is try to break that story down into 6 manageable kind of levels. We're going to move through a lot of material here. One, we're going to go back to some of the basics. What is really taking place here, and how much room do we have left in this digital revolution? Particularly looking at new media, there's really 3 spaces I want to look ahead on. The mobile space, where it's going, the social space, where it's going, and video. I do want to bring in this energy thing because I think it's a really fundamental thing. Anybody looking ahead has to kind of start to wrap their head around it. And the final thing I'm going to wrap on is just essentially where this, what I call kind of a problem-solving capacity, is essentially going through a big upgrade here. So if you look at the numbers here, internet penetration, this is essentially by region of the world here. This is North America's, actually the highest penetration in 2010. Basically getting close to 80% of the population is fully connected to the internet. I mean, look at the Middle East, 30%, right? Ah, that's interesting. A lot of stuff's going on in the Middle East, right? Anyhow, look at those numbers are starting to really hit. And the whole world now is about at 30%. Now, these are the numbers in 10 years ago, at the turn of the century, the millennium, those were the numbers. I mean, just remember that. Even in North America, there's only 30% roughly of people were online in 2000. This is essentially an age pyramid. Young people at the bottom there, that's the age. The youngest ages, the oldest ages at the top. They called it a pyramid in the old days because you had a lot more babies, and ultimately you'd have one old guy or old woman at the top, the wise old woman, and everybody died off in good order, except this is how, until the baby boomers essentially came along, because they're not going away. But anyhow, it's not really a pyramid anymore. What I do want to focus on is this crew right there. The millennial generation is bigger than the baby boom. They are as influential, and it'll probably be more transformational, I would argue, than essentially the baby boom generation did. It's a very interesting generation. Now, how does that work globally? I did want to just point out, this is Tahrir Square in Egypt. This is essentially, if you take the United States, all Everybody under age 30, which is the bulk of them, are millennials. But if you look at Tunisia, wow, there's a lot of trouble there. That started the whole thing. Ah, well, they had over 50% of them were essentially under 30. Oh, Libya's got problems, right? Ah, 61% under 30. Hey, Yemen's got a lot of problems, right? Boom. Almost 75% of people are under 30 there. Demographics, technology, combine them, boom. Young people do not give a rip about tradition. They don't think about the past. So let's just take, these are numbers from Goldman Sachs, not Pete Leiden here. This is up to 2050. Now, this is essentially projected American GDP growth. That's China. That's India on a slightly stutter step behind, but it's ultimately catching the same upward trends by mid-century. That's Japan, that last one, and that's Germany. So the two powerhouses of the 20th century, beyond the United States, Germany, Japan, basically irrelevant in terms of the real drivers of the global economy. Now, this brings up the energy piece. This is something that I just think everyone has to figure out, but I think it has a big implication for business. We use 18 terawatts of energy a year, and it's coming from, if you look at those things, gas, coal, oil, plants is the green one. There's a ton of stuff we still burn, particularly in the developing world. The little sliver there of the red is nuclear. So this is what we have to have shifting. There has to be some mix where nuclear certainly has to expand. That's controversial to some people. But also these other mixes, you're going to have to figure out wind, geothermal, solar, and, there will be, like I say, a substantial amount still of carbon. But essentially, it's a huge build-out. I think we're going to see a paradigm shift in problem solving, how we actually solve problems. And this is a great, server farm. You remember the days when everybody was thinking, oh, you got to get bigger and bigger brains. Supercomputer brains is what really is going to make faster and faster computing. And someone said, wait a minute. What if you essentially broke a problem down, distributed it amongst smaller kind of little brains, more cost-efficient computers for that matter, and then reassembled the answers, and boom, maybe that would actually be a scalable way to actually get a more powerful kind of brain work, and then essentially a very expensive supercomputer. Well, there's essentially an analog what you could do with that scale of people solving problems. But the thing is, with technology, you can finally get that kind of large-scale parallel processing, getting many, many people working on the same scale of problems. And with that, I'm going to basically wind it out in a last little bit here. Go back to where I started. There are these explosions of kind of innovation that we've talked about in the past. If you look at what's happening today, we're in a kind of a similar situation. Now, the last time this happened, let's just think what was going on then and think about how it might give us confidence of what's going to happen now. The last time you saw it, you had a similar situation where you said the world was up against these really intractable problems. Nuclear war was essentially their climate change issue, which at the time, if you remember, was just as daunting and just as kind of perplexing to them. So what they did, though, they took the technologies they had at the time and the human resources they had, and ultimately, in the space of literally about 15 years to 20 years, they essentially figured out a way to get out of the Great Depression with a different kind of economics. A lot of innovation, Social Security, a bunch of things in our country, but also this happened in the post-war European world as well. Crazy amount of innovation happened within the space of just a relative historical blink of the eye. And so what are we going to do? We're essentially facing a similar slide of like, oh my God, those same images I mentioned to you there. But ultimately, we've got even more human resources. This is essentially college-educated people in the United States, starting in the war, essentially 1940. In real terms, essentially it's the difference between 5.6 million people, college education's dead compared to today. But the key thing is, what if you would have told guys like FDR or Churchill or all these folks, and you would have said, you know what? We're going to put this thing on your desk, or better yet, we're going to give you this thing in your hand. You can ask any question in the world, and you will get all the world's information ordered back to you in a second. Everybody would have looked at you and said, that is total magic. It's like impossible. And of course, it's called, Google or whatever you want to call it. It's an extraordinary tool. The powers are just unbelievable in a historical context. And so we are totally able to make this transition. It is a century trajectory we're on for the next 10, 20, 50 years, but we are on it. With that, I'm going to say thank you very much.